Hey, welcome to my channel. My name is Michael Mall. Today's video is about governmental submission. So for the past several years, as a nation, as Christians, we've been suffering. The presidential campaign of 2016 was the beginning of a period in American history that hopefully we will never witness again. After former President Trump was elected, his presidency was embroiled with hate, fraud, racism, and social unrest. Then, as if that wasn't bad enough, COVID hit and opened another can of worms. Do we wear masks or don't we? Do we close schools or don't we? Do we stay at home or don't we? Don't we close entire cities and states or don't we? Then, as if that wasn't bad enough, there was another election in 2020. And it was one of the most hateful and egregious elections I have ever witnessed. Hate, bigotry, and slander divided our country, our families, and our friends. And sadly, we're still suffering from the backlash of that election. Do we vaccinate or don't we? Is the vaccine a form of governmental control or isn't it? Is it the mark of the beast? Now, unfortunately, COVID has mutated into a deadlier strain named the Delta variant. So, once again, do we wear masks again or don't we? Do we close cities and states again or don't we? The arguments start all over again. In the middle of all this, there was fervent talk about defunding the police. People stormed the Capitol. There were riots in the streets that destroyed neighborhoods, causing millions of dollars in damage to cities. There was talk of insurrection and a very real movement of rebellion against our government. People began to ask themselves, do we rebel, right? So the question I'm going to address today, or questions I'm going to address today using the Bible and Scripture is, should Christians ever rebel? Should we as Christians ever rebel against the government? And if we should, when should we rebel? And if we do, how do we rebel? So if we decide to rebel against the government, how do we do that, right? Do we do that Martin Luther King style with campaigns of nonviolence and picketing, or do we do it with violence, destroying cities, setting things on fire, overturning cars, ultimately killing people? Do we do it Malcolm X style, correct? So let's start with 1 Peter 2:13 through 15. Therefore, submit yourselves to, and let me pause just to say this is going to be a long study or a long video. My typical videos are between 30 and 40 minutes, usually 25 minutes or so. This is going to be a little bit longer. So therefore, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether to the king as supreme or to the governors, as to those who are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. So Peter begins with, therefore, submit. The idea is that submission is a way of glorifying God. Submission is a way of you and me, both of us, giving honor and giving God glory in our lives, keeping our conduct honorable. So today, and specifically, we're dealing with submission to the government. We are to purposefully come under the submission to the government, right? So, but this is a good message for us to hear, right? This isn't a bad message. This isn't a horrible message. This isn't a message of, oh, you need to blindly follow the government in everything they do or say. But in times of turmoil, it's a good message for us to hear that Jesus Christ is telling us, that even God Himself is telling us, hey, you need to come under submission of the government because the government is good, despite what you personally may believe the government is good. So let me continue. In a society, and more importantly, in a time when the government's ideology is slowly becoming more liberal, submission is harder. We trust God in everything else. Why not trust Him with our government? So in this world, we have two options: control yourself or be controlled. And this is how it works in society. Just look at our prison system. It houses people, if rightly convicted, who couldn't or wouldn't control themselves. Now they are controlled more strictly than if they were free. So Peter is going to explain our role in this submission, what he knows submission to government looks like for a Christian. In fact, he gives us categories for it. Submit to every ordinance of man, submit to the king, and submit to the governors and those who he appoints. So, first, um, the ordinance or laws of men, whatever these men choose to ordain. It doesn't talk about us submitting to only the ordinance of God, but to submitting to the ordinance of men as well. Doesn't matter if the laws are lame or inconvenient to our daily life, God calls us to be submissive to them. And we tend to think we know better. And sometimes we react with a holier than thou, rebellious attitude. However, God addresses this in the book of Numbers, in Numbers 16, 1 through 40. I'm not going to read the whole thing, I'm going to summarize it. A man named Korah, with 250 conspirators, rebels against Moses after the exodus from Egypt. They decide that Moses and his brother Aaron are lost and leading them through the desert without a clue. They are questioning their holy appointment by God and doubt their honesty. As a result of this tyranny insurrection, God punishes Korah and his conspirators by killing them. So we need to pay heed to that rebellion in our hearts and come willfully in submission under the ordinances of men, even though they're just the decision of men, right? They're not necessarily our decisions. They're not necessarily God's decisions. They're men's decisions, and uh, we're to be submissive to them, right? This is harder when it's in the realm of this is harder when it's in the realm of ministry, right? You love the Lord and you're serving in His ministry. However, it's unavoidable that as you get to know your ministry leaders, that you'll find things that you don't like, right? So this is where submission is important. You have to give your doubts and condemnation to the Lord and pray that He works it out, right? Sometimes God does amazing things despite the bad decisions of the leader. However, they may know something you don't. And God didn't show you what to do because you're not the leader, right? It's a little arrogant to think that God's always showing me the right thing to do and that my boss or my pastor just doesn't know it. And I use the example of ministry, but this example is applicable everywhere. Your work, right? Your employer, your home, right? With you as parents or with you dealing with your parents. So now the next part we're going to talk about is tithing and taxes. And a lot of this is going to be about taxes because the two biggest complaints that people have against the government are taxes and, of course, the laws, right? Are the laws fair? Are taxes fair? I don't want to pay taxes. I pay 10% to my city and then I have to pay to the government and then I have to pay for this and this and that and that. So tithe and taxes are part of these ordinances. So these are hard to abide in because we like to hold on to our money, right? Jesus addresses the subject of taxes in Matthew 22, 17 through 22. Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, and he's talking to the Pharisees, um, just to give you a little background, every time the Pharisees had a conversation with Jesus, they were trying to trap him into saying something heretical or into committing apostasy, which is turning Jews away from God. So they never wanted to have an intentional conversation with Jesus about his ministry or about his relationship with God or why he believed he was the Son of Man, right? Or part of the Trinity. Every time they had an exchange with him, it was simply just to trap him or trick him. So knowing their evil intent, he said, "You hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying taxes." So they brought him a denarius, and he asked them, "Whose image is this, and whose inscription?" "Caesar's," they replied. Then he said to them, so give to Caesar's what is Caesar's, and to God's what is God's. So, and Jesus and Peter paid taxes, right? If anyone was entitled to not pay taxes, it was Jesus, right? His father, he was God, created this earth, created all life, created everything that we enjoy and everything that gets on our nerves, right? He created everything we know to be good and everything we know to be bad. And he sent his only son to die for us, to forgive us our sins, and to allow us to have a fruitful and willing relationship with him. And yet he paid taxes. He willingly paid taxes. He didn't stand up and say, I'm Jesus Christ, the Son of God. I'm not paying taxes, right? No, he paid his taxes. So he willfully submitted himself to the ordinances of men because he knew it was important. He knew it was what his father demanded. And it's on my mind. I don't know if it's in here, but we also see in the Garden of Gethsemane when the Pharisees and their guards arrived to arrest Jesus, right? To take him before the Sanhedrin. Jesus could have said, hey, I'm the Son of God. You can't arrest me, or I'm not going to let you arrest me. As a matter of fact, we learned that the garden had an exit, right? Jesus came back to the entrance of the garden to meet the Pharisees and the guards. He could have went out the exit and totally avoided it, but he knew that he had to come under submission to be arrested. And so he met them at the entrance to the garden to be arrested when he didn't have to. So the reason this question was a trap is because the Roman Empire was not using the money from taxes for good things. Caesar built statues of himself all over the city as well as temples. Roman citizens were legally required to worship him as a god. Additionally, they built public bathhouses, which were little more than brothels that enslaved young men and women into unwilling sexual servitude. The Jews at the time were unwilling to pay taxes because of this perverse and flagrant misuse of the money. This was a hot button topic at the time. If Jesus said no to paying taxes, he was an enemy of the state. If he said yes, he was an enemy of the people. So Jesus is telling us it's not our job. So Jesus is telling us it's our job to pay taxes and their job to spend that money. They will be judged on how they spend it, and we will be judged on whether we pay it. So we're also called to obey the king as supreme. We are told by God, our King of Kings, that we are to recognize earthly kings and their secular authority. We are to recognize their authority despite our own pride. John 18:36 records this. Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place. So I interpret this as meaning that we don't look to the kings of this world to pattern our behaviors after. It also means that his kingdom is not in competition with the kingdoms of this world as they are with each other. So this means that whatever country I'm in, I will be a great citizen and patriot of that country. There's no conflict between my national loyalty and my loyalty to God because I'm going to honor him by submitting to what he has placed around me. We're also to submit to governors and those sent by him. This means that from the highest to the lowest, we are to submit to these authorities. I respect this political party or organization, but not that one, right? We often tend to respect the authority of the mayor or the governor, but we'll treat the employees at the DMV terrible, right? But they are those who are sent by the governors, right? They work for the state. So they are under the leadership of the supreme authority, right? But often we treat them terrible, or we treat police terrible. We treat other workers of the state terrible, but yet we have respect for others, maybe others that don't affect our daily life, right? So currently, and for the past couple of years, we've been dealing with an issue of respecting law enforcement. Now, note this has nothing to do with whether they've earned it. or deserve it by right of their good behavior. We are simply required to submit. We are not required to evaluate them or to decide if they're worthy of respect. We're simply to submit because of the position they're given. Right? We're simply to submit because of the position that we're given. I read that line twice. There's a saying in the military that was popularized by the HBO series Band of Brothers. It's called or it goes, salute the rank, not the person. So you respect their authority in the position that they're appointed to, even if they're a bad person. Honor the position because it's a legitimate position. So Daniel 4:17. The decision is announced by messengers. The holy ones declare the verdict, so that the living may know that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes and sets over them the lowliest of people. So this means you can expect at times to look at a person in a position of authority and think to yourself, who put that person in charge? Yet God sets over it the lowest of men. He will sometimes give the people who they've earned or who they deserved based upon the decisions they've been making. So, as we look back over the first part of the verse, therefore submit yourself to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake. That is the key. Not because the government is right, not because that person in that position is so worthy or deserving. It's because it reflects poorly on God when I look lowly on the organizations or structures he has set over me. It's ultimately about my relationship with God. My submission to the government is about my relationship with God. So 1 Peter 2:15 through 16. For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. Live as free people, but do not use your freedom as a cover up for evil. Live as God's slaves. This is such an important verse. God's will for us is to do good, and this includes walking in obedience to governmental authority. Sometimes God's will for us is less glamorous than we'd like to imagine. By doing this, I'll put silence the ignorant talk of foolish men because they'll see this obedience and submission. Everybody understands the language of honor, respect, and obedience. They get that. And so we will be a light to the country we're living in. I'm free, but I don't want to use my freedom as a cover up for evil. Rebellion isn't evil, and God doesn't want us to use our freedom as an excuse for rebellion. So the concept of submission is prevalent throughout First Peter because it's important. First Peter 2:17. Show proper respect to everyone, love the family of believers, fear God, honor the emperor. The words here are so important. To respect someone means that I'm behaving humbly. This is a great attitude that brings people in when they see you treating people with respect. We're to love the family of believers. And notice again in the scriptures that we're seeing this family being set apart from the world. If I can help my family, I will help them first. Now, we have many charitable organizations that help non believers in our neighborhoods and all around the world, but so few that help our Christian brothers and sisters, right? Our Christian brothers and sisters struggle financially, right? That they're starving, right? It's very biblical to help other Christians. So then we're to fear God, and that puts him highest on this list of respect and love. We fear God because he has the highest accountability. We put him above all others. Finally, honor the king, not as much as God, but because of God. So we love complaining about the government. We love memes that hate or make fun of the political party we don't agree with, right? We love them even more if they make fun of a particular person, such as Trump or Biden. We should try to be careful. And we should try to be more careful as we refresh our hearts in these principles that we don't find ways of deriding those in authority in our country, right? However, Jesus was not above calling leaders out while still being respectful and living under submission. Luke 13:32. He replied, "Go tell that fox, I will keep on driving out demons and healing people today and tomorrow, and on the third day I will reach my goal." The fox in this case is Herod Antipas. Jesus probably called him a fox for two reasons. The first reason is that he was possibly sly as a fox, consistently deceiving the Jews. Second, he was a very bad man. He was put into power by Caesar Augustus, and built a temple honoring the Roman Emperor Tiberius on a Jewish cemetery. So he was also a philanderer who had several wives and other female interests. So let's look at an alternate passage, right? Romans 13:1. Let everyone be subject to governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. So the first sentence of that verse is very generic. It's meant to be. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities. It applies to wherever you happen to live or be. Whatever government is in place, be subject to that government. For there is no authority except that which God has established. In Genesis, after the flood, God initiates man's authority over man. In Genesis 9:5, after your lifeblood, I will surely demand an accounting. I will demand an accounting for every animal, and from each human being too. I will demand an accounting for the life of another human being. So one of the issues before the flood was that there were no real governments in place. Men just did what they wanted. There were no real governmental structures in place to exercise authority over the wickedness of men. So imagine if we had no police. What kind of country would we live in, right? It would it would get so bad that we would create police, right? We would see everything going wrong in our society and we would create a form of police to replace the form of police that we just got rid of. All right, so in the rest of Genesis chapter 9 and 10, we read that God establishes governmental rule over different sets of people in different countries. So there's no authority except God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. That is such a huge concept that the Lord has put every member of our government in place. He has put the president in his place. Are we saying that mankind doesn't have any influence on this? No. Within his sovereignty, he also allows us to have an impact on that. But he works all of it together to his will. He is ultimately in charge. Romans 13:2. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. So this is easy to understand. If you rebel against the government, they will come and get you, right? We watch the cop shows or we see it on TV where a guy does something bad and the SWAT's they're all surrounding his house with guns out. And, they yell, police, please come out with your hands up. And the guy doesn't come out and they break down the front door and storm in and drag him out, right? Or, you see the shows where the cops are uh, delivering warrants to people's houses for arrest, right? Or where, people are, you know, um, if you break the laws, they're going to come and get you, right? So maybe don't break the laws. So Romans 13:3, for rulers who hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. So do you want to be free from fear for the one in authority? Then do what is right and you will be commended. Once again, easy to understand. The general idea behind governments is that they typically have decent laws. They generally go after people who do bad things. So Romans 13:4. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid. For rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. So this is a practical application for law enforcement and the justice system. They are appropriately armed to carry out justice when the law is broken. Romans 13:5. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. Again, this is practical. However, don't just simply obey because you're afraid you'll get in trouble. Obey because you want to keep your conscience clear before the Lord and walk in obedience to Him. Romans 13:6-7. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If honor, then honor. So governing is a full-time job to those who govern, and they have bills to pay and families to feed. Pay your taxes as it pays their salary. Once again, it doesn't mean they're right. It just means we are to recognize and submit to them. So this is a biblical view of governmental obedience, and our submission to government. Now let's address rebellion. So there are three basic ideas for biblical rebellion that have come up in the past: anarchism, radical patriotism, and biblical submission. Now keep in mind these are all Christian views, so they're not going to seem like the words that I just read. The first type is Christian anarchism. This means that I'll obey God and ignore government. This is like the views of some of our founding fathers who believed we are obliged to obey government unless government has laws that are not godly. If the laws become tyrannical, we do not need to obey them. Thomas Jefferson believed that if a government is tyrannical, then it's my Christian duty to disobey that government, rebel against it, and create something different. This doesn't seem to fit with what Scripture says. At least based on that, I wouldn't rebel. Based on that, should I rebel? Right? This view comes from our own sin nature because our nature is to rebel. If you're a parent, then you know that the first real word that your child learns is no. And more importantly, they learn how to use it properly, right? They don't just use it flagrantly. You're like, "Hey, don't touch that." No. "Hey, put your toys away." No, right? They learn how to apply it practically and correctly. So, anarchy feeds our sin nature and appeals to the baser part of human nature, and it can be scary. Typically, anarchists hate other people's rules, but will have their own rules. So radical patriotism swings the pendulum the other way. I'll always obey government, even if they're telling me to do something wicked. So we witnessed this with the Nazi regime when officers of the Third Reich justified their horrible crimes with statements such as "I was just doing what I was told." Right? This means that every war is a just war for both sides, right? If this government says go out and kill these people, and then the other government says go out and kill these people, well, then they both can say that God is on their side, and this is a problem because it makes no sense. So though we know God ordained human government and asks us to obey government, there are too many examples of believers disobeying government and being commended for this obedience. Right. In the second chapter of Joshua, we have the story of Rahab. Rahab, a prostitute in the land of Jericho, hides two spies from the king. Now, although it was her patriotic duty to reveal them, she hid them from the soldiers and smuggled them out of the city. Now, these spies were Christian spies. So, as a result of this action of her faith, she became a believer, and God blessed her by placing her in the lineage of Mary. In Exodus 1:15-21, we learn that Pharaoh orders the Egyptian midwives to kill all Israelite boys as they are born. However, they refuse, and God blesses them with families of their own. In Daniel 3:12-28, we are told the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? Three Jews who refused to worship the God of King Nebuchadnezzar. When the king discovered that they would not worship his God, he threw them into a furnace to be burned to death. However, they were delivered from the flames and did not perish, right? These behaviors disagree with radical patriotism, but what do they have in common? It is the idea that at that point, obedience to the government is disobedience to God. This, I believe, is the biblical view of rebellion. When obeying government means disobeying God, doing something ungodly, or me being pushed to do something ungodly, then I don't do it, right? I don't form a physical rebellion by recruiting people into a rebellious army for the purpose of creating a violent movement. I have a rebellious heart or rebellious attitude because I refuse to do something that is wrong. I will not obey what you said because it's wrong. You are pushing me to do something ungodly. Now this is not rebellion if now this isn't rebellion if the government allows ungodly things. It's rebellion if the government tries to get you to do ungodly things. So, for example, the government allows abortion. I am anti abortion, right? The government is allowing an ungodly thing, but the government's not asking me to do this thing. They're just allowing it. So, civil disobedience is not the same as violence. And all throughout the Old Testament, we read stories of the Israelites being involved in wicked things because of foreign governments. However, people were only in trouble, Israelites were only in trouble if they participated, not if they hesitated to stop their neighbor from doing these things. So, when should I disobey government? I believe I answered that previously, but remember, we obey government because of God, not because they are God. I disobey when they ask me to sin or otherwise neglect a righteous duty. How do I disobey government? First, I obey God. Second, once I realize there's an area I have to disobey government in, I don't completely disobey everything and do whatever I want. I disobey that one thing and still fall under submission. Third, once I disobey, it's okay to run, right? David fled when Saul tried to kill him. Jesus fled on several occasions when the Pharisees conspired to kill him before the appointed time. He didn't exactly run away screaming and flailing his arms. It was discreet and subtle, but he still ran. The apostles also fled on several occasions. So and that leads us to number four. So, four, if you're caught and punished by the government, submit. Submit to that punishment. Can we seek to change our government? Of course. We need Christians in government. We can't affect change in our government if we don't participate. So, what about an armed revolution, insurrection, or promoting a theocracy? A theocracy is religion takes over the world, a familiar concept to what Roman Catholicism was trying to do in the early days of the church, where they were trying to submit the world to their governing authority. I think 381 AD is when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. And then we think sometime during that time, Roman Catholicism was born. And then from that point on, we see that they take hold of the religious community and they try to solidify a government under the church, which, as we now know, didn't quite work out. But so this is difficult to answer. We have no scriptural evidence to support any of these ideas. My only answer would be to seek the Lord, pray steadfastly, and be very, very slow and cautious to raise a hand against the government that God has put me under. I hope this has been fruitful for you. Have a blessed day.